Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Thoughts on that one? Oh, not. Oh, yeah? When I get back. No, I was in a hurry. So.
Weight management. Not very good. You ever seen a Costco pie?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a pie. It's
I know whether to go to her house tonight.
Oh, you go.
Is there a flag? Exactly.
The reason they want to avoid that.
Outside.
They have in the future. So that's so anyway, that's just. After the phase three.
There will be something. Oh, that's what I'll say. Yeah, I know it's desirable. I hope that yeah, it's very. So, but I mean, you know.
Evening, Jim. How you doing, John?
Love it.
No, you have to look on the
I'm sorry if you want my ear. Oh, I was thinking. I had another new driver's
I'm sure you are. My father might. For some days.
5 points.
It's really old.
See, it works. Weather was great.
It was just. Yeah. Oh, okay. What did you?
Lives outside of town.
I put my snowshoes on today and I drive. It was so icy.
There's a main street just cut.
Her name's so familiar. Been around long.
Last guy was early, but last guy was young, got kids.
I like that.
Him and his wife, might be good hands.
Yeah, sounds good. Variety.
Yeah, there's more resumes than really say about it.
I didn't get that far.
Yeah, no, I looked at them all, but when you don't know the person, like, how do you read a resume?
Right. And they're all the way there.
Okay, you got Nancy Rundell, Victor.
I like the idea, again, without knowing it.
I know it's hard to make it educated.
Yeah.
Next one.
But I don't want to put any more money in here and now it's we probably won't revise it. I thought the world
Blakely made a phone call from Brooklyn, so Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
They still want.
So they kind of get.
Nice to have some skin in the game.
Well, we can look at it. So.
It's easier for me to read it there than across.
Yeah.
I can't quite.
Casting for like GDA or.
One each. Tree and plant.
Nothing for the GDA or whatever it is.
They're all full.
Someone resigned.
Well, I definitely, I would keep that one, keep that resume.
Might be good on the RRC board.
She didn't get it second year.
Talking to people about that. They said they were interested and then they never showed up.
The RRC.
Yeah.
A lot of bread in that one.
Yeah.
And entice people to have breakfast. Bagels.
John Cassidy seems like one to reach out to. There's a little background.
I don't know him well. He's been
Oh, we did pledge.
Two times.
All right, 7 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. All rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you. Roll call.
Al Dyka. Here. Nancy Rondell.
Here.
Matt O'Gara.
Here.
John Cups. And John Leo.
Yeah.
We do have a quorum.
Very good. Okay. Any citizens comment tonight on something that's not on the agenda? Yeah, there's a hand. Please, your name.
My name is Lisa Moscow Watson. I live at 450 State Street, right in town here. I just wanted to know if there was any more information that you found out about parking, about the kiosks. If there's any funding for it, if there's any other information. It's not on the agenda, yes.
Right. I don't think so. Everything we had last week was everything we know about it. Anyone else for public comment?
Yeah, we do have a couple council members had reached out to me individually to potentially bring some revisions to citizens' comments based on the way the comments have been going previously. One of them is to continue allowing individuals on Zoom to comment on agenda items, but only if they can speak and not read out the actual chats. And so that's something we did last time. So I brought that change. Another one is to have the residents or citizens that are speaking approach the front of the room and sit or stand at the desk or the podium. And council wants to approve those changes, they can. It's your guys' meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine with me.
Those make sense to me.
Yeah.
It was difficult when folks were out in the doorway trying to talk. It was hard to hear and see, so I think it makes good sense.
So one more, and the last one was that, just to clarify that just because people ask questions doesn't mean council, you have to answer those questions. It's, you can if you want to, or you can wait, put it under new old business, or you can just go ahead and answer the question. So I'm just emphasizing that in this.
I make a motion to amend the public comment rules.
I'll second that.
John Leo.
Yes.
John Cups.
Yes.
Matt O'Gara.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
And Al Dyka.
Yep.
Motion carried.
And for those on Zoom, it'd be helpful if you raise your hand if you want to speak. There is a hand function that you can click on, and I'll call on you when it's time for citizens' comments.
Okay. I guess we're on to the consent agenda. Any issues on that?
Yeah, Nancy had contacted me earlier in the day and found a couple small changes on the minutes that I had corrected. One, they just dropped off an actual word that made a sentence not make sense. And the other one, I just added a couple words to the citizen comments about the voluntary show of hands. Other than that, I don't have any other comments or changes.
With those changes, I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
Matt O'Gara.
Yes.
Al Dyka.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
John Cups.
Yes.
And John Leo.
Yes.
Motion carried.
I believe we have, is Martha here? Yes, here. Martha, Yes, the Emmett Transit Authority Working Group is looking to perhaps start an authority to, I guess, create public transport in Emmett County to replace MGO, or kind of a step up from what MGO was. And Martha's gonna discuss a little bit about what that working group is doing and what they're asking from council tonight, which is a letter of support.
That's right, thanks. I'm gonna take this off so you can hear me better. And I'm here representing FEET, Friends Enhancing Emmett Transit, which is a loosely organized transit advocacy group that's been around for about 20 years. FEET had representation on the Transportation Authority. I didn't specifically, although I sat in on all the meetings and I provided some behind the scenes technical support, so I'm very familiar with this. You'll remember that back in September, you had a presentation from the leadership of the Emmett Transportation Authority, and I hope you all had a chance to look at the very detailed proposal that is provided. I do have some handouts for you. I think I'm going to give them to Matt. There's one for all the council people and
Becky.
the city manager. And my contact information is on the back. There's also a link to
Rebecca.
that. So if you didn't get a chance to read it.
What's he doing?
Nothing. They're talking about something else. Did you get me one?
If you're on Zoom, can you please
No,
mute?
that's all right. Don't bother. I'll get it. I'll get it later.
So it's so fun. Okay, so getting back to what I was saying. But I'm here to give you an update on what's happened since then, and also to, as we heard, to encourage support to the commission on behalf of the proposal. So since then, the Board of Commissioners have been considering the proposal, and they assigned to Mike Reeves, the county administrator, I think in September, to do further research on it. And he and his staff have been doing that, have been doing a lot of research, talking to people. And I believe he's gonna come back hopefully with a specific recommendation, probably pretty soon. So a letter of support from the city would be very timely and very helpful. This is a great time to start transit. And I'll back up a little bit. I think they told you in September that we are one of only, I believe, 2 rural counties in Michigan that don't have transit. Most of them had it for decades. But this is a good time to start it. There's a lot of money in the infrastructure bill, both for MDOT and for the Federal Transportation Administration. And there's Did you mute everybody? Did you mute everybody? Yay. All right, so there's a lot of funds in the infrastructure bill that's come both to MDOT and to the Federal Transportation Administration for public transit, as well as other sorts of transportation projects. There's also the possibility of using some of the ARPA funds that the county has for some of the startup expenses. So this is a good time to get started on it. Again, the tribe has offered some significant funding. The tribe, as well as FEET, really wants to see an authority developed. Now, there's 2 basic ways we could have public transit in Emmett County. The county could itself develop a county department and provide transit, run transit. There's also the possibility of creating an authority, and that would have representation from cities, townships, stakeholders like senior citizens, geographic disparity for the whole county, and FEET feels really strongly that that's the best model for Emmett County. In Michigan, about half of the transit systems are each type. And some can, Charlotte County has a department, they do a really good job. There are other departments that don't do a good job. But there are a number of reasons why we believe an authority would be the best model for Emmett County. It would give cities and villages and townships some seat at the table, as well as seat at the table for the tribe, which they really want to have if they're going to bring their deep pockets to the table. I guess I would entertain any questions. I do remember last time when we were here, and I know that cities had positive experience with other authorities. I believe the fire authority, the sewer authority, the airport authority. This would be very similar, except it would have taxing ability. It could levy a millage, and that, I don't believe any of those others do that. I don't know if they could if they wanted to. So where do our commissioners stand on this? I think at this time, they all are supportive of having public transit of some sort in Emmett County. And that's a big step up from a few years ago. But there's quite a range in what they would like to see. And the commissioner that represents this district, Charlie McGinnis, I have heard him say he never would support an authority, but I'm hoping he may warm to that as we've been presenting information about how the county could have a whole lot of control and input into that. Maybe not control is too strong a word, but somewhere between control and input. So he wouldn't feel that there wasn't a voice for the county commission. They could have, they could appoint all or most of the commissioners or the people that would be on the authority board. They could have a seat on the table itself. They would have to approve the millage. It's subject to open meeting rules, lots of ways that the county could definitely have a voice in that. So any questions? It's moving along. I think it's gonna pick up. I do believe that the county commission is gonna, the proposal is gonna come back to them very soon, and they're gonna take some sort of action. Hearing from the city that you support this would be very helpful. And here is a sample letter of support and some background information.
It's also on the screen, the same.
It's also on the screen. Actually, I updated it a little bit because we have, oh, maybe not, new county commission chair. Okay. My contact information's on the back, and you are welcome to contact me.
Thank you very much. Any interest in sending a letter to the county?
Like if they put it as an authority and would support it.
I like the idea of the
I
authority.
like the idea of the authority because everybody has a vote.
Mhm.
Now you'll actually get a consensus across the whole county.
Right.
If it's more limited than that, then it's gonna get skewed. I like the idea. So the ask from the city today is just a letter stating that we are in support of it.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to do that.
Support of an authority though, not
Right.
county, not county run.
Not county run, no.
No.
The proposal.
So, motion by,
Mayor, I'd ask if you want to open it up so I can say some comments.
I guess any public comment on this before we vote? No.
We need some public things.
Thank you.
You got a hand up.
Man,
Oh,
sorry, we're a little late.
Yeah.
Fred Simons, I live at 455 Arbor Street. If I'm not mistaken, the authority can also levy for a millage,
So
which means more taxes.
possibly
To fund transportation.
tip on transportation.
But
To fund transportation.
Yeah.
Martha, would this type of authority would millage have to go to vote of the people?
Oh, absolutely. I was gonna say that, Fred. Yeah, so they can't just levy a millage. They could bring forth a millage issue, and it would be up to us to decide if we wanted it or not.
we have a motion by Councilman Dyka to offer a letter of support to the county with the stipulation that it is under the county authority.
Yeah, John.
Okay, I'll take a roll call. John Leo.
Yes.
Matt O'Gara.
Yes.
Al Dyka.
Yes.
Nancy Randell. And John Cox.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
All right, moving on to 3B, Lansing Library Contract Price Increase. So Lansing Area Public Library is the library that we use for library services. I'm not exactly sure when we began our contract. The first contract I saw was about 2013 or 2014. And there's a 3-year contract. Their old contract was $3 per capita annually, which was about $3,600 annually. They've upped their increase, their per capita cost to $4.50 per capita annually, which has moved the annual cost to $5,700, which is a $2,100 increase. When I wrote this memo, I didn't get the statistics back. I hadn't got the statistics back from the library, but they did send it to me over the weekend, and I shared those with council, and I do have it up here. And usership is quite low with Harbor Springs residents. We're looking at the largest monthly number of items checked out was in August of 2020, which was 64 books. That doesn't mean 64 people necessarily were checking out.
Okay.
If you're on mute on Zoom, can you please mute yourself? I thought I muted everyone, but. So that doesn't necessarily mean that many people are actually checking out those books. So if we're looking at the numbers, that varies between 15 and 20 to 30 and 40 a month. So you're talking about, if you even assume one person, each item is checked out by one person, we're talking about 5%, 6% residents using that library monthly. I've talked informally to people. Some of them use the Lansing Library, most don't. A lot of them use the Harbor Springs Library. Some go to Petoskey Library for services. So really, I would ask council to look at this item as if we had, whether or not we have budget constraints or not, whether it makes sense to have to continue this contract. It would be a 3-year contract. And it would be for $450 per person. So at about $5,733 annually.
Are we obligated to provide a public library service?
No, not that I could find. I searched that, I couldn't find an answer to that.
I have a question for Al. Did you remember when they were thinking about putting the library up at the top of the hill? This was a lot of years ago. You guys remember that, John? They were, and I think the original contract probably came from there when we decided not to put a library there so that people would have access to public library. And it was before internet was around. I mean, there were a lot of differences from when this originally started, I think. It was a long time ago, 30 years ago, maybe. It was a long time ago.
30 to 20
It was
years
quite
ago, yeah.
a long time ago. I don't remember the specifics, but I think that's why this started in the first place, was so that we would have access to.
It was partly in response to the Petoskey Library.
Right.
Here in the district library.
Right.
And the ability they gave us to borrow from
The big library
the
system.
big library
Yeah,
system.
we can get into.
And I don't know what the fee is to be a member of the Petoskey Library, but there was interest in town that people wanted
Right.
access to the big library, which I guess can go
Get
all
books
the way
from
to
all
Lansing.
over.
Yeah. And so rather than pay the larger fee to Petoskey, we moved to go to Lansing. And where we send our penal funds anyway, when fines are paid to Jim, what?
You can direct them to a public district library. Yes.
And that's where we send our penal funds.
To help support the small library.
To help support the small library and give Harbor Springs residents access to the big library.
Right.
The big one on the side.
So background, I think that's where this came from.
I know my father uses the Petoskey Library and orders books all the time.
It's not a problem.
I don't think they charge.
So he pays a fee as a
Yeah.
As
a non-member.
Right.
We aren't a member.
It's pretty minimal.
Yeah,
I think, well, Kathy checked for me Kathy Leo, when we were, I think a couple of years ago, it was 95, right, Kathy? At the Petoskey and 25 at the Lansing.
Right,
buy a
$95
library.
a year to use the Petoskey Library.
And 25 for Lansing, correct? So if residents want to use it,
And I believe if you're a senior,
it's
your
probably
Lansing is
not.
15.
Yeah. So that to me makes more sense than the city paying over $5,000 when we don't have that many folks that use it.
And the Harbor Springs Library does have, as I understand it, they do have internet access to borrow any books in the state, and they are part of that interlibrary loan system, and it's free and you don't have to be resident.
I think things have changed since we started doing this. So.
Okay.
So I don't, think it makes sense for the city to pay that.
Given the utilization,
Yeah.
I don't think we
Yeah.
should do it.
Yeah, if they were 100 a month, 100 plus a month, I'd say, yeah, do it.
Yeah. It's a lot of money. So what do you need? Do we need a motion?
Yeah, we need a motion because it's a contract and only council can authorize me to sign a contract with this, so.
So I would make a motion not to renew the contract based on the discussion we've had.
I would also encourage citizen comments.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Citizens comment on the library?
You just saved $4,000. That's a start. Thank you.
Bill,
Bob in the back?
Don't we already support with our taxes the college library,
Sure we do.
one of the best libraries in the area? I haven't heard it mentioned one time. I think that's something that we ought to let people be aware of. That's an amazing library.
Good point.
Yeah. Your citizens comment? Okay. Got a motion and a second.
We do have a second. Who was the second support?
I don't know.
I'll second. Yeah.
I thought we had one.
Matt Bogira,
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
John Cops.
Yes.
Al Dyke.
Yes.
And John Leo.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, great. I'll reach out to them. All right, item 3C, revenue generation options. Last council meeting, council tabled the paid parking discussion and asked staff and the public to come back with alternative revenue generation options. I, of course, did a couple presentations before on that, so I created a new presentation, kind of compacted previous revenue options, and also threw in some of the residents' suggestions for revenue options at the end. Go through this relatively quickly, and then council can discuss. So some basic goals to keep in mind. We want revenue streams that require fewer expenditures. Those are better. So the less upfront costs is better for a revenue structure or revenue stream. We want sustainable revenue streams, preferably over one-time revenue options or inconsistent revenue streams. Diversification will help the city weather future economic uncertainties. We're primarily focusing on the general fund in this presentation. There are some suggestions to help other funds, but general fund is where our primary focus is. We aim to prevent the reduction of services, amenities, and operations, and aim to build up a reserves for maintenance projects and capital improvements projects. So all those factors should be playing in your mind when we're going through these options. Urgency, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not how urgent we need to do this. And I think Nick and I have emphasized multiple times, we're not in an emergency situation. But without new revenue, we must either reduce expenditures, which includes cutting services, or continue dipping into our general fund balance reserve. Last December, council opted to dip into the historical fund reserves to pay for potential cuts or in replace of cutting. So that's where we're at right now. So in order to avoid those cuts and dipping into reserves, we need to find new revenue. If we do this for too many years, and by this I mean if we dip in our reserves for too many years, the state will require a corrective action plan. So while we'll still be showing a zero, maybe a balance of zero, no deficit, no surplus, the state will see that we're dipping into our reserves and they will demand a corrective action plan. And we want to avoid that. Just as importantly, we want to plan now to avoid getting ourselves in an emergency situation. It doesn't make sense if we get an emergency situation 3, 4, 5, 7 years from now to say, hey, what are we going to do to get ourselves out of it? We need a plan now so we avoid that situation. So is it urgent? Are we in dire straits? No, but it's better to deal with it now before we get to that point. Heli override, of course, this is a topic of consideration still amongst residents and council members. If we go for a new Headley override, I would recommend uncapping to 8 mils. Continue limiting the city's ability to raise a millage by $0.5 annually and making it for a 5-year limit or less. As I said last time, a 5-year limit, the year limit is only helping the residents. The lower the year limit, that's the sooner we start out being able to move the millage up by more than 0.5 mils. What are some of the questions and unknowns with this? Is there an appetite? I mean, it failed quite handily in 2020. So is there an appetite to approve the Headley override? Will people understand what the 5-year limit means? I don't suspect they will. They didn't understand what the 20-year limit meant. I don't think they'll understand what the 5-year limit meant. If we do this, we probably have to go back to the voters again in 10 to 15 years. So it gives us a lot more room. But obviously uncapping to 15 mils, prevents that. But I think it's a viable alternative, but I just don't know the appetite of the residents. One millage has been discussed as a public safety millage, and it could cover police or the fire or both. Just as an example, 2 mills could bring in about $540,000. Our police department expenditures annually are between $750,000 and $800,000. That is about 30%, 28 to 30%, depending on the year, of our general fund expenditures. You could do a public safety millage for as long as you want, 5 to 10 years. 5 years would probably be easier to start with. Some of the unknowns and questions is you probably have to go back to the vote. You would have to go back to the voters after it expires to renew the millage. If the renewal vote fails, then we are forced to cut police significantly, assuming a Headley override has not happened. Because what you're doing by taking the police out of the general fund and doing a separate, when you're doing a separate millage for the police, you're reducing your amount of obligation in the general fund and the amount you can tax there. So if Headley trickles and let's say we have a 5-year public safety millage, and Headley takes our taxing authority down to below 5 mils, and then the voters don't approve a public safety millage, there won't be that kind of money in the general fund to support the police department. So it's just something to think of, and that applies to all special villages if the Headley override doesn't happen. So again, with parks millage, same thing. It could cover the cost of parks operations and improvements to parks. A 1 mil would generate about $270,000 annually. Our park expenditures without any major capital improvements is about $370,000. This includes all our parks from skate park to Zorn Park to the beach. Again, 5 years, time limit is really up to council on that one. And same questions and unknowns as the public safety millage. Some others have brought up the idea of a capital improvements millage, which could cover, improvements to buildings and infrastructure that aren't part of other funds. So we've talked about the boardwalk. We've talked about, for example, the roofs on City Hall, parking lot improvements, and even structures at parks. Again, 1 mil generate $278,000. And something to keep in mind is that each project would vary in cost. So maybe 1 year we would not need any money, and maybe the next year we would need more money. So it could help us build up to do a project. So it could help us build up a reserve fund for when we need to do projects. But it won't necessarily solve a revenue shortfall for covering current operating costs and service costs. So while this money will be dedicated and voters would know where their money is going to for a specific project, there's still the general fund services and operating costs, which this wouldn't really alleviate. A refuse collection millage, that could cover brush, leaf, and recycling, which the city taxpayers already pay for through the general fund. If we wanted, you could always add trash collection as a service and cover that with the millage. Current expenditures for brush, leaf, and recycling are about $100,000 annually. I think it was $104,000 projected for this year. A 0.5 mil for 10 years would collect about $130,000 annually. So it would cover just a little bit more of what we spend annually. I don't know how much it would cost to add trash collection to the city, and I don't know if that would be desirable at all for the residents, but a lot of communities bundle them together in a millage. Fire authority millage. So something that a lot of residents aren't quite sure about is how our fire authority works. The fire authority controls our fire department. We, the city of Harbor Springs, is a member of the fire authority, along with Pleasant View Township, Little Traverse Township, and West Traverse Township. And they essentially control the operations. We do some of the administrative work when it comes to budgeting because they don't have any staff to do the budgeting. So the fire authority is able to levy a millage. The board for the 4 township representatives have to unanimously approve going to the voters for a millage. All voters in all 4 municipalities would have the ability to vote on it, but the millage will pass if a majority of combined voters vote for it. So if it fails in the city of Harbor Springs, but passes in Little Traverse, West Traverse, and Pleasant View, it would probably pass and would apply to Harbor Springs. So, but that money would then go to the fire authority to have run their own operations there. Instead of, right now what they do is they come to the city, they come to the townships and say, we figure out how much money each township and city should pay based on usage and population. Right now, the city's costs annually are about $75,000. I think Little Traverse Township is probably a little higher because they have more runs and more people. Pleasant View is their contributions are a little smaller. $500,000 across all 4 municipalities would probably give us over $500,000, the fire authority over $500,000, and give them a lot of room to operate with. Currently, it's probably what, Nick, $300,000 or so.
$250 to $300 is an annual budget for the fire authority, depending on needs for the year.
So it would help the city. It wouldn't cure our budget or revenue deficit problems, but it would definitely, go a long way. $75,000 annually is substantial. The big unknown is, will the fire authority board be willing to bring this to a vote to their constituents, and will the constituents pass it? So it's kind of like a public safety millage, but for a greater number of townships and municipalities. One question we received a lot is whether or not we could ask the townships for more money for our parks. And this is something that Nick has been talking about since I got here, about that we need to do. And right now, Little Traverse and West Traverse contribute approximately about $26,000 for the skate park, sledding hill, and beach operations combined. The city takes on about $74,000 of those other costs. We could just ask for more money, but we'd have to determine what is equitable. And usually what is equitable is dependent on usership. And you don't know usership unless you're doing surveys and visits.
Ray, I'm sorry I interjected. You were talking out loud.
So another issue is what happens if the townships say no. So even if we collect the data and the townships say no, and I'm not saying they will, I think we've had conversations with them and they seem open to how much money. I don't know how open they are, but if they say no, what do we do? I feel very unlikely that we're going to close the parks and programs just because the townships say no. What happens if we discover other townships or other municipalities residents are using it more? For example, what if we find out 15% of the users are City of Petoskey residents? Are we going to go to them and say, City of Petoskey, you got to give us money to keep our parks going? So it could get a little, complicated, but I don't think anything doesn't hurt to ask the townships. I just don't know how much money we'd actually get from them. And we'll have to have those conversations. And I think what I've talked with Parks Director Rachel Roon, that we want to spend this summer collecting data so we can go back to the township supervisors and say, we did this data and, X amount % of your residents are using our skate park or our sledding hill or the disc golf course. Another option that's a potential option is a parks authority and parks millage through that authority. So by authority, we're talking about creating authority, sort of like our fire authority or sewer authority between the city and a number of townships, whatever townships would want to participate. You could propose a millage for each member municipality. Unlike the fire authority, if the millage fails in a municipality, those residents would not be required to pay, even if the millage passes overall. So there's a little different structure for parks authorities than there is for a fire authority. We could include as few or as many parks as we want in this authority. Some questions we have to think about, though, is we would be partially relinquishing control over city parks to townships. And so, how does this interplay with some of the deed restrictions we have on some of our parks? Are we willing to give away some control over parks so we can get some more money from the townships? It's a question council would have to discuss. And would we gain any partial control over any parks in the townships? I'm not really sure. A lot of the parks in the townships are county controlled, so I'm just not sure about that question. So special assessments, we talked about this in November in length, and I'm just kind of recapping what a special assessment is. It's not a tax, it's a levy designed to recover the costs of improvements that confer specific and local benefits to a neighborhood or a defined area. Examples that have been given in other communities use are rubbish, recycling, drains, street lighting, weed control, right-of-way maintenance, erosion, et cetera. So for example, if we added new sidewalk somewhere in Layton Park and we wanted to specially assess someone up there, we would say, all right, you 20 houses are paying a special assessment for X amount of years for the new sidewalk, or if it's street lighting on a different street. So that's usually how special assessments work. It's much more difficult to do special assessments citywide. And you have to make the case whenever you do a special assessment that it increases the value of that property. So you have to be able to justify your special assessment by saying whatever project you do, the properties that are in that area, their property values will theoretically increase. There's a whole process in that, it includes showing the project area, the cost estimates, holding a couple of public hearings, and then passing a resolution detailing the dates for bill payments and et cetera. This is not something that goes to the vote of the people, but there are 2 public hearings at least required. We talked last time about a city income tax. This is quite unpopular, but Act 284 of 1964 allows Michigan to impose income tax from its residents as well as for people who work in the city. There's 24 Michigan cities who do that. Most of them are quite large cities downstate. You can collect up to 1% from in-town residents and then up to 0.5% or 0.5% from people who work in the city. This vote must be approved, or this millage would have to be approved by the voters. It's quite unpopular, and it also is a lot of work on the city because we have to adopt a uniform tax code and essentially have a tax department. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in my opinion. Donations, we've heard a few different options for different kinds of donation. One is setting up a trust, which would be controlled by a separate board that would release money to the city for certain projects. The benefit to that is more people are willing to donate if they can control where the money goes to. It gives less control to the city because the council would have, no authority on where that money goes. They'd be at the will of the trust, the board of the trust. The donors could also earmark donations to specific city projects and services. We get that quite often for tree donations, but it could be for any other specific thing. Or donations could be donated straight to the general fund, and the city and council could use as they see fit, but that's less popular because people like to donate for specific projects or services. Donations to cities are generally tax deductible, so long as the monies are used for a public purpose. And some council members might think, well, everything's a public purpose. But what they mean by that, everything that the government does is a public purpose. But what they really mean by that is you can't donate to the city and then the city's gives you a break on your zoning fees or your taxes or something like that. It has to be, it can't be a private benefit, can't be gained from your donation to the city. Conditional donations may not necessarily be palatable or even possible for the city. And I think free money is great, but it's not reliable on a consistent year-to-year basis. So I think accepting donations for projects, specific projects, is usually the way most cities go, and it works quite well. It's worked here, it's worked other places, but for general operating services and funds, doesn't work as neatly. Residents, and some of these revenue options that we're presenting now were from our previous discussion, but most of these are suggestions from residents as well. The revenue options, grants, we're continuing to pursue grants. Annexation of surrounding land, that's a touchy subject, and it's a lengthy and costly initiative. Decrease administrative fees to other funds. I think we already have a hard time justifying the amount of money we already transfer from other funds into our general fund. For example, I maybe spend $15,000 to $20,000 a year on electric department stuff. So technically, part of my salary is covered by the administrative fees we transfer in from there. I don't know if we can transfer much more money to justify, we are transferring more money than that, but I don't know if we can transfer much more than we are right now. I don't know how to justify that. We'd have to look, Nick and I would have to look, I know Nick's looked at other cities to see kind of formulas they use for justifying administrative fees. It definitely would have the benefit of lightening the burden on the general fund taxpayer, but then it increases the burden on those other funds as well. So, which means then you have to increase user fees in those funds, whether it's the water, sewer, or electric fund. And then you get a potential trouble if you are using fees that are meant for a specific thing, like electric fund. Fees are meant for electricity to improve a park. That is, that's an enterprise fund, and you could potentially, but you're subsidizing the taxpayers' projects with a user fees project. And something we have to remember is that our users for electric and water fund are not just in the city limits, they extend well beyond the city limits. So someone who buys electricity out in Little Traverse Township expects that their money that they're paying for that goes to their electric system and not to something else in the city. So we'll have to work on that, Nick and I, on figuring out a rationale and looking at a formula for that. But I think we're already having a hard time justifying what we're doing. Somebody suggested bottling water and selling it. That would be an enterprise fund. I think it could be a good idea. His theory was that there's cities that have poor quality water, and that, Harbor Springs has great water here, spring water here, and that we could sell it to those people in communities who have bad water. But it's an enterprise fund initiative. It's not going to solve our general fund issues because it'd be enterprise, but it's a lot upfront cost to that as well, and we'd have to have so many employees. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I just don't think right now is a good time to get into it. Someone suggested selling vehicle decals, kind of associated with the paid parking. If we went with paid parking, that proposal B had a permit list kind of permit system, there'd be no actual decal or tag. So this person suggested selling vehicle decals just because, again, it would be an enterprise fund. We can't just do business in the general fund unless it covers a service. Increasing the slip and mooring rates or increasing the number of slips and moorings. This has been brought up a lot to the Harbor Commission and the community. That would benefit the waterfront fund and any waterfront improvements, but not necessarily general fund services. Sell public resources, such as some of our smaller beaches or parks and the airport land. The airport land is tricky. It's tied to many leases and many subleases that go on for several decades. I don't want to speak for Jim, but that's a whole probably legal.
A lot of grants too.
A lot of grants. There's a lot there. There's a couple smaller beaches that people have brought up. Sneaky Beach and Washington Access are small. The question there is, does council and the public want to give up public waterfront for a small injection of cash? That's a question for council to think about. Local city sales tax, people have talked about that. State does not allow cities to do sales tax. A local occupancy or lodging tax, a city of our size cannot do those taxes. Increasing zoning fees, actually, we've talked about this with the zoning administrator about how we can increase our zoning fees to make sure that they are they're matching to the services and that we're providing for people when they apply for zoning permits. It wouldn't be substantial, but it still would help some part because the zoning is inside our general fund. Toll roads, someone did mention this. I haven't explored that one in depth. I think that would be very unpopular and costly. Someone also said pay to use restrooms. It's probably less welcoming than paying to use parking spaces. Implementing our own fiber network. The city actually was approached by someone a couple years ago to put in our own fiber system, our fiber network for cable, et cetera. It's just really costly. It costs several millions of dollars just to get going. And then who knows how long the return on investment would be. They estimated 15 to 20 years. And then who knows what new technology would come up in the future. So, and then there's paying an annual fee to use specific parks, maybe such as accessing via a card. It would require some installation costs and some monitoring. Again, having gates or something like that at parks is a little unwelcoming. So those are the suggestions that I've looked at and that people have given to me that I think were even remotely possible, if not popular. So I'll open it up to council and then however you want to proceed, if you want to proceed with a council discussion first, or if you want to go to citizen.
Discussion first, and then open it up for public comment. Talk some more.
Lot of ideas.
Lot of
Lots of
ideas.
ideas. Lots of ideas. Probably have to do this a multi-pronged attack. I think we're gonna have to take another bite at the Headley eventually. In the time being, maybe do a police or public safety village. We can work with the fire authority on that to save some money down the road, but that's, could be a couple years off before that one happens. I don't know, the lodging tax, can you be the lodging tax countywide though?
Our county is too small.
Too small.
I think if they have a county of 600,000 people, double check that.
So that one's kind of off the table, but I think, and then there's always the parking that goes in there too. Yeah, I don't think there's one thing that's gonna fix our problem. So we have to cast a wider net.
I agree.
And I think those are some likely options. How fast we can do any of them. Hate to keep biting away at the general fund balance.
I'd like to see us put some millage proposals on the next occurring ballot, whatever it is. Let's get that back out there, because ultimately that's going to be part of this. I think we should throw Headley out there again, and then maybe these the fees to move the leaf pickup and stuff like that into a fee. Maybe we can do that administratively. I don't know here, but if not, if that's got to go to a vote, then we do it. Or if we decide we want to shift that to a special fee and take it out of the general fund, that we should just do that. And also the police, I'm less inclined to do that with the police. I hate to have that become political. And same with the fire. I don't want those to be political things in this town.
I'm not sure that any proposal that we make will not be made political, given recent experience. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but we haven't seen an overwhelming analytical approach to what we've been proposing.
I think we need more information. I mean, I'm not ready to make any kind of decision. It's kind of where my thoughts are going today.
I think we can narrow it down to a couple options.
Mm-hmm.
Focus our attention on that.
Yeah, we can throw some things out for sure.
It's the silver lining of everything that's been going on. I think there's some really great ideas that have come to the fore, but we've never done it. For this council has never done it. We need more investigation. Further analysis of expenditures is going to tell us, I think, more where we should and need to focus. But to the presentation, the most recent update, we really want to address this now before it becomes urgent. I think it would be irresponsible to continue to dip into our reserves. The city's worked hard to get those reserves in place. The future is unpredictable. You can read about projections that we're at the peak of the real estate market and the values continue to go down. The doomsday scenario we've been talking about with millage is going to come to pass. So I think there are three viable options that address a macro part of the problem. One of them is to go back to Headley. I think people have learned a lot about Headley, and it would certainly be an ongoing educational challenge to make sure, as Victor pointed out, that people understand the whats and the whys and the hows and the implications. The second and most identifiable expense is the police department, not from a political perspective, but from an expense perspective. It's a service that everybody in town that I have talked to feels we need and respects and feels that they're doing a good job. So to me, that's kind of easily identifiable as a specific millage if we decide to go that way, with the understanding that that can then only be used for police. There's no flexibility in the city to use those monies elsewhere. And the third one would be paid parking. Those are the three that generate revenue. And not having at this point in time, a preference for any of them, one of the unique aspects of the parking, paid parking, is that it is a non-tax revenue source for the city. And it is a way that people who visit our town help contribute to the cost of maintaining the town. And the group that is understanding of and even supportive of that is not a vocal group. I've made it a point to talk to people, to go to homes, to go to businesses, to talk to people. And there are a lot more people that support it than the vocal against vote has been. So we need to give it serious consideration. One man's opinion.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you about the paid parking. People who vote here would rather pay for parking than pay more taxes.
That's mine.
And
That's the
bottom
feedback
line.
I've received.
I think, looking at the millages, and I appreciate all the ideas. People have spent a lot of energy and time trying to put stuff together, which I think is great. To me, the most logical is the Headley, because I think the others are just Band-Aids in some respects. So we free up money with public safety. It comes out, the money comes out of the general. We have the millage, so we have money left in the general fund, if you will. Since we have a millage for the police and fire, then we can spend what's in the general fund the way we see fit. So to me, the Headley makes more sense. It's the other ones are just kind of a roundabout way of putting money in the general fund. To me, that's the way I look at it. And it's a longer term fix. I think we would have to do a lot of education because I don't think people understand it. I think and I get why they don't. It's very confusing. It's very tricky. And I think that I'm not sure we're ready to go back with that yet, but that's the one that I would really like to see put out there if we're going to put a millage out there. I don't want to sell any city land. I feel really strongly about not getting rid of city land. I just don't think that's a good option. And again, like you said, Matt, I think we're going to have to come at it from several different angles.
Right.
I mean, even if we did paid parking, I would never promise anyone that was all we were going to need to do. That would be foolish. But it would at least lower maybe a tax increase. Maybe we wouldn't have to go quite as high.
Right.
That's, I think that's where I'm coming from on the millages and parking.
If we were to pull police out of the general fund, what's that millage wise? Couple mil?
No, 2 mils gives us $540,000 to cover the 800,000, would probably be more like 3.5 mils.
Yeah.
So does that open up our general fund or the funds that we can work with as a council? Do we have to play with that money now? Do we have extra 3-4 mils to play with?
Essentially, you have that extra, whatever it is, $700,000. So you could technically reduce the millage rate to the general millage rate.
But if we reduce millage rate, then we can never bring it back up.
We can, no, we can. We can't bring it back up to the Headley rollback. Yeah, which is probably about 5.68 this year.
Which is one of the advantages of the Headley override, which solves the long-term problem, which is why we're here today. Now, to Matt's point about voters versus not, do you have an update on the petition, just as an example?
Yeah, we do, I'm sorry. there were 1,654 signatures that were applied or on this petition. And of those, 113 of them were registered voters. So there was a few that were duplicates and some that didn't have an address, but
City registered voters.
city registered voters, something that would, if this were to go on the ballot, the people that are registered to vote would be the ones voting on it.
And that jives with what I've heard from talking to people, one-on-one.
10% of the population.
About 10%.
9%.
9%.
And that was before we had looked at proposal B. That petition went out with just the initial, lots of kiosk and all that, before we even had talked about permits. And I feel that some of those folks would probably flip knowing that they would be able to park for free.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well,
It's a
no one
pretty
even
low-
knows about the proposal.
I know.
No one even heard us
Heard us before.
at the meeting last week, so that's sad, but that's the way it goes.
So we did table paid parking to March 7th, so I guess conversation here, I think, going to Al's point is, my intention was never to say we need to choose one of these. It was to bring these options and see which ones
Right.
council thinks are palatable and wants city staff to explore for the future, whether it's this spring, summer, however council wants to do it.
The next election cycle, which would involve a millage of any way, shape, or form, if that where you guys head, is August. But the deadline to get something on that ballot is rapidly approaching. And then obviously there's November still too.
And there is a sense of urgency because we get the budget season again.
Right.
And we don't have anything in the pipeline. We're back to the reduction of services that was not popular either.
It's probably the least popular.
Nobody likes that.
If we're not careful, anything we do is gonna be popular.
Should we open it up to the
Sure.
public now?
Sure.
Here,
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just a reminder for people on Zoom that joined late, if you want to be heard on Zoom, please raise your hand on Zoom. We'll not be reading out chats.
You're up, Jeff.
First, I have a question for Nick.
shoot.
So out of the 100 and something signatures you said, I guess that's the petition you were talking about, that there's 1,650 plus
Correct.
people. You know what that's not including, and I would venture to guess it's a pretty big number, are the number of people that pay substantial taxes in this town that do not vote here, because obviously they'd rather be a resident of the state of Florida or wherever, save on taxes.
Sure.
So that's a pretty skewed number. I do have a statement I would like to read. It does have some ideas, but it also is talking about the paid parking. No, the clock's not running yet, Victor, because I'm asking a question. So should I read that now, or should I read that next week, or maybe just read my ideas now? All the above?
Sure, give it to us.
Okay. We'll restart.
Reset the clock, please.
The game show.
Yeah.
We are told, I'm sorry.
Go.
Oh, this is on the theme of the Christmas song, Do You Hear What I Hear? We are told to come to City Hall and voice our opinion because you say you listen to the voters and the people of Harbor Springs. Well, this is your chance to prove that you really mean that. It seems that the voters about 1,650 plus against any kind of paid parking, and I know of 3 people in favor of paid parking. If the majority wins over the minority, as common sense would dictate, this issue is dead, over, put a fork in it, let's move on, find a solution that does not include any kind of paid parking. This is what the people are supposed to be, you're representing or telling you loud and clear. There is no way that you can hear anything else except no paid parking, no paid parking. This is so obvious and so easy to understand. How can you not hear the message that is being told to you? If you truly want the people to come to these meetings, then you have no choice but to vote no for paid parking. If you can't hear what you're being told right now on this issue, then there's not one reason to come to any of these meetings, because it says you are not listening at all. 99% against paid parking kind of says it all. Let's see if you're really listening. I concur that the idea of this paid parking has been discussed in the past. The reason it never made it this far is because previous city councils listened to the voters they represent and died. Again, let's see if you're listening to the obvious choice. I have 9 points and ideas. The electric fund has an unrestricted fund balance of $2,925,000. The city currently receives about $123,000 in administrative fees, or about 2.75% on revenue of $4.5 million. This fee can and should be easily raised by 5% and add another $229,450 to the general fund for a total of $355,647. If we can waste $130,000 on solar panels, this should be a no-brainer. Also, need to look at other management fees from other revenue sources. Savings at least $50,000 annually when these lawsuits go away. Currently, there are 7 lawsuits, not just the 3 IBS suits on the FAQ state. Delete leaf pickup, $35,000. Delete stop curbside recycling. We have recycling centers, save $36,000. Can we afford a Parks and Rec person at this time? Saving $50,000. Get rid of the deer cage, save $10,000. Delete the DDA, there's $100,000 in the account, 33% of it's for one person. Building up a slush fund is not an emergency. We have 8 months of funds available and would like to have 9. Okay, the sky is not falling. We are not in any type of dire need. This can all be solved without any type of paid parking, millage, or tax increase. You always have those options later if needed. If there truly is a need for this option, please deny it for a 20-year term, since this is a ridiculous request. Although the choice seems very easy and extremely obvious, it's up to you. Please listen to the over 1,650 people that signed the petition, plus the many letters City Hall received. We are offering win-win solutions plus other ideas, and it should be tried before spending plus or minus $200,000 on a paid parking plan that may or may not work. 0.
Good job.
Thank you. Practice.
You get an A.
That was right to the second, I have to say.
Practice, I'm done.
Anyone else from public comment?
Hi, I'm Miranda Miller. I live at 651 2nd Street. And I'm reading a statement as requested by Laura Coors, who could not be here tonight. Laura lives at 261 Traverse Street. Laura has stated and agreed that with most of the citizens in Harbor Springs that we are not in an emergent economic crisis as council and city manager would have us believe, except for suddenly tonight we're told we're not. She is asking that no financial decisions or lifetime impacting decisions for this community occur until after the reassessment in the 4th quarter of 2022, including the recent increase in sales of homes and new construction resulting in increased property taxes. This is including non-homestead properties, which obviously generates more revenue. For example, Mrs. Clark's house on 3rd Street, where she's lived since she was a child to her passing about a year ago, sold after 70 years and was purchased in 2021 for $475,000. Mr. Weber's house on Traverse Street was purchased by him for $40,000 and sold in 2021 for $500,000. The home on the corner of Church and 3rd, same scenario. Mrs. Wallstrom's lifeline house on the hill on Traverse Street sold in 2021, was completely renovated with an addition of a $500,000 carriage house. The 2 Mossberg constructions, the new constructions on Bay, both $4 million houses, along with 2 new condos on Main Street. The Blaisdell's house on Bay Street, the old Sip and Ski, was sold and completely renovated. New construction on 2nd and 3rd Street, new construction on Zolan Beach, we are guessing around would be about a $15 million home. These are a few examples and revenue that is not being accounted for. With Michigan rating 12th highest in property taxes in the nation, and Harbor Springs is 99th percentile of property tax health, meaning Harbor Springs is the 3rd out of 279 cities in Michigan per capita. This information, this is factual, it can be found on the Michigan Treasury Community Financial Dashboard. And now, as of tonight, seeing that we are no longer in an economic emergency, and knowing this factual information, we have plenty of funds that can be managed, but managed with fiscal responsibility and by departments. And of course, the obvious, separate the needs from the wants. I think after tonight, we can agree that paid parking or a millage is not even necessary. Why do we have to, if we have, there are other revenues of finding money, cutting some of the fat, even attrition in city employees, but perhaps the Parks and Recreation, that's a hefty one. and Harbor Springs is not an appropriate city ever for paid parking, but, I don't understand why a millage is just the immediate knee jerk to try to get heavily back. Why don't we try to manage the money and find the money that we have to begin with? Thank you.
I got a clarifying question. At the end, was that you speaking or Laura Coors?
Where?
You
Yes,
said- You said it was Laura Coors that was,
this was partly generated from Laura and partly from me. It's information that I
I
know.
just want to clarify that.
No, Laura brought up the houses and the other. This was,
I just got a message from someone on Zoom and they're having a hard time hearing. So I don't know if people speaking need to turn the microphone.
Okay,
That would be great.
thank you.
Bob?
Last meeting we had, we talked about putting together
Can you come up front so everyone can hear? Sorry.
putting together a citizen volunteer fact-finding group that would address these situations with no answers. And try to identify what do we need? What do we want? What can we pay for? I haven't heard anything like that. I'm almost sitting here thinking like the question has been put on the table without anybody asking, well, do we really need that? And we may have to cut services before we do other things. That's fine. And maybe we need to do a survey of what are people willing to do? Are they willing to do Headley if they understand it? Are they willing to do $500,000 just across the board? What do we know? And basically, I think some decisions would be made without anybody really understanding what it is they're voting for in relationship to the people that you all represent. As I said 2 weeks ago, I voted for most of you and I trust you 100%, but people can't make decisions without knowledge and information and facts. And if you can't get that big a group together, then they get what they get. But I have said I'd be willing to sit on that group and come up with some things. What do we need? What do we want? How much do we have to play with? And let's go from there. Because this city is not a place for paid parking. No way, no how.
Wendy Reeve,
Wendy,
left, right.
Wendy, can you come up to the table so they can hear you on the Zoom? It's your 15 seconds, 3 minutes of fame.
In the city manager's November 2021 report to City Council regarding the revenue options for the city of Harbor Springs, Council is presented with 12 options for increasing the city's income. The first option presented and chosen was the Headley override. It crashed and burned. Of the other 11 options, all but the final 2 are sneaky ways to circumvent Headley, and all of them amount to taxing us, your constituents, in another way. The final 2 are selling assets, grants, which the city employees seem to have difficulty with, and a council favorite, donations. Paid parking was 9th on this list and is council's second attempt to squeeze more money from the 1,200 citizens of Harbor Springs to pad the bank account. By any measure, council should by now be aware how vehemently the citizenship oppose paid parking. And if anyone believes that free parking permits for Harbor Springs citizens is the answer, they should look across the bay. Petoskey, with 5,670 residents, offers a paid parking permit that started at $150. Last year it was $300. This year it is $750. In other words, once we grant the city the right to do this to us, how do we rein in their greed? However, that city manager report is only 50% complete. Page 2 covers fiscal responsibility, and while the raising revenue is the first listed option, the second option is to cut services, decrease programs and amenities, and delay or cancel infrastructure projects. What is glaringly missing in that statement is cutting salaries, cutting staff, and reducing expenditures. Do we need a full-time DDA director with an income of $32,000? Do we need a full-time parks director for $35,000? What can she be doing 8 months out of the year, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? And I cannot forget that the city manager was quoted in the Harbor Light in September that the city did not have enough income to mow the grass in the parks we currently have, while he was attempting to spend $5.6 million to purchase another park. We are trying to foist big government on this small town when we taxpaying citizens deserve a city government that runs lean and efficiently. We should not be missing filing deadlines for any grants. That's free money. Surely there are more than enough well-paid employees that someone can manage to file paperwork on time. To be succinct, you aren't making wise choices with our money now. You aren't missing opportunities for free money. You are overpaying and overstaffing the public offices. We would be foolish to give you any more money to mismanage. And I want to add that if you want to know the support for paid parking, put it out for a vote and you'll see exactly what your support is. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a couple on Zoom.
Okay.
Liana,
Yes, I'm here.
you had your hand raised. You can go.
Okay, great. So I just had a couple of thoughts, questions that I'd like to put out there. And one of them is I'm curious how each of the entities that are listed that are proposed millages, how might they streamline their budgets? All those budgets seem quite high to me. And I suppose that perhaps I could be more precise as to why aren't each of these entities being challenged to reduce their budgets? And I say this because when I see increases coming, whether it's personal or professional, I have to find ways to pull my budget back. I just can't go out in the street and go, hey, everybody give me more money so I can operate. I have to find ways to make my operations meet my budget, not the other way around. So I'm wondering why this isn't being discussed. That's one of the things I had to ask. The next one is what proposal was Mayor Matt referencing to when he said that no one even heard a proposal last week. I'm kind of curious what that is because I did miss last week's meeting. And then finally, I'm curious about the report that's in the Petoskey News. The report that's in the Petoskey News. And that report is talking about $31,500 that didn't get assessed to the fire department. And so I'm curious how that money weighs against this proposed millage for fire authority. Do I unmute at this point so there's conversation, or what do we do here, Victor?
Well, Liana, can you state your name and the address so we can get it for the record?
Yes, everybody knows me. Liana Davis Peachy. I'm at 325 East 3rd Street, Harbor Springs.
Okay. All right. Comment, council, that's up to you. You can just wait to answer the questions later, or that's fine. We also have another hand raised. Susan Hicks. Susan, if you want to go.
Yes, this is Reverend Susan Hitz from the Harbor Springs United Methodist Church. I am the pastor there at 343 East Main. And I was at the meeting last week when it was quite packed. I was unable to come in person this week. However, I wanted to acknowledge that last week you were asked to come up with other options, and I appreciate the varied and many other options that you brought. Certainly some of them seem more palatable than others, but when you were asked to come up with other viable options to think about and discuss, you did. I look forward to seeing how you work through this, but I do want to acknowledge the effort that was put in to come in with all of these ideas. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Guess we have to answer Liana.
I have one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Jan Blanchard, 830.
Jan, could you tell me, Brad? I'm sorry. The new rule.
Okay, Jan Blanchard, 832 Pennsylvania Avenue, down here. I'm a year-round resident, but I'm in the condos, so most of my neighbors are summer only or come up occasionally. They're all against paid parking. I've talked to them all, and there's just a lot of people. I'm not even on that list that is that you're talking about over there. I didn't get that. So I just know there's a lot more people out there that are opposed. And I know you need money, but I feel like it's not a desperate situation like you've stated. I think times are tough right now, and we're gonna get over it. We're gonna see some changes, hopefully, in our government in a couple of years. And I'm hoping, and we know that people are coming, more and more people are coming to our town, so there's more and more tax revenue should be coming. And we've seen a lot of people moving up here, long-term, working out of their homes, and so I feel like it's gonna get better. We're not one of those towns that people are just moving away from. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm also in favor of a trust or something. I mentioned that, and I think on the online next neighbor thing, I mentioned that because I think people are givers. It's not like we don't want to put a dime in the parking meter, it's just that we don't want to spoil this beautiful little town of Mayberry here. And I just,
Woman.
what? So anyway, but I do feel like people are givers, and like if people have extra money or know that if they want to give to a trust fund for our city, that people will do that. I would. So anyway, that's what I want to say.
Thank you.
Hi, can I sit?
Yeah.
Karen Charles Donnelly, 644 Ann Street. I just want to, I've heard a lot about revenue cutting, but I just want to remind everyone about what we went through and during the budget process, where there was an attempt to cut about $120,000 out of the budget, including beach operations, the debris pickup, et cetera. And everybody objected to it so strongly that we dug into the budget and found another way to replace that $120,000. So I want to remind people that's kind of why we're here right now, for this reason. Second, on the paid parking issue, I know Plan B is the one that people are looking at most seriously. I think it'd be really good to look into the details of that if we're really going to have to buy a bunch of kiosks up front for $50,000. How many permits are we really going to sell for people outside the city? Are we really going to get the money we need out of that after all that cost and expense and all the bad feelings about paid parking? And the third thing I would want to say is just looking more into the revenue sharing opportunities. In other words, are there other monies that the townships would be willing to share with us for some of the services they enjoy? How that happens clearly, other than just sharing in the money equally, is it giving people identification cards or permits for their cars or whatever? But I think they may be amenable to putting some more money towards what they enjoy doing in the city of Harbor Springs. And maybe it's more than just the beaches and the parks. It could be other things too. That's all.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Maggie Lacy, 315 East 3rd Street. I do want to point out that part of the Headley equation is that they do look at the inflation rate, which it did go up from 1.014 last year to this year that's being evaluated at 1.033. So even though we do look at the Headley, we're worried about doomsday situation that's happened one time in history in 2008. But we're coming up upon high inflation this year, so it'll be interesting to see where we land. But I think that's something that we all have to remind everybody when we're talking about the Headley Amendment. So if you're looking at taxes, people want to know where their taxes are going. And I did a little bit of homework with a couple of different cities downstate that had parking, no parking, understanding what they were doing with their budget. 3 areas that seems to have a lot of support: public safety, fire department, and code enforcement. Police department makes a significant amount to the budget. And there's an area that we should be looking at that could be applied to with the fire department. That would be creating 501c3, which is other cities are doing that. So looking at equipment that needed to be used, that could be looked at. I guess another thing is the Public Act 345 millage for police department's millage that we haven't looked at. That's something that we have to try to fulfill as our pensions. Other cities are doing that. And of course, looking at a very specific millage for the police department. This is controllable, measurable, and can be reviewed yearly with outcomes. And I think that's something that the city is interested in, or the citizens are interested in about. Also talking about two different cities, Birmingham that has paid parking, West Bloomfield that does not have paid parking. Discussing the two different situations. I know you can kind of compare Petoskey to Harbor Springs. We keep on looking at that $900,000 for Petoskey, but the cost of executing that out brings out the net value to be a lot less, let alone the execution. And as was mentioned earlier, the cost of kiosks, the yearly fees, and the amount of using that per time that's being used. The big picture that the police referenced to me was that it's a nightmare to execute, especially going down to the manpower and, oh shoot. And the elderly are not used to it. And also people would rather get a moving violation than a parking ticket. Okay. And there's other ways to raise funds, but sorry, I thought that was my timer.
My timer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? No,
I just want to talk real quick. I'm willing to say anything about the police village, and so I'm just going to speak briefly on it, just as far as we are the biggest source of expenditures for the city. My concern about a police village is the fact of if we have officers over there and I'm trying to recruit officers to come here and work and knowing in 5 years that they might lose their job. Right now, I just talked to my counterpart in Mackinac City. He's got an opening. He has this many people apply. Our current opening, I had 2 people apply. And like Mrs. Lacy said about downstate, I agree. Downstate, they have big cities with great pools of people that apply for those police officer jobs. I was just at a conference 2 weeks ago in Grand Rapids where there was 300 some chiefs. Of those chiefs, there was roughly, they asked how many people are fully staffed. There was probably 2/3 of them are fully staffed. So my concern up here is the fact that if we have a millage, which I understand, if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. But I'm concerned about staffing. I can't consciously hire somebody and know that in 5 years, they might be out of a job. And the other side of that is I don't know if I can get anybody. So that's my 2 cents. So thank you.
Let's go.
I guess I got about 2 seconds left. I understand. I'm the biggest part of the budget. I get it. And I will do my share of trying to make sure, as we're sitting back here and people are talking, what are we doing to try to reduce how much I spend? And I will consciously look at that. But I worry about retaining people and getting people to come.
Just a comment, the chief has a documented track record of finding ways to reduce expenses within his department, up to and including vehicle purchases. So the insinuation that we're not doing that, I think, is a little offensive.
I will try.
You're already doing a great job. Anyone else? Yeah. Well, what kind of direction do we want to give Victor?
You want to respond to the one?
Oh, yeah, I guess we gotta talk.
Well, she wants to talk to me, not here about the fire department stuff. I'd be happy to do so.
Yeah.
This ain't the place to talk about the fire department, so.
Leanna, I don't know.
She wants to reach out to me directly. She can.
Leanna, you can reach out to Chief Cups for questions about the fire department and I think it was a $4,500 grant, not a 30.
Yeah.
31,000, but she did ask about proposal B.
Yeah.
The park.
Yeah.
If you want to give her the quick rundown on that.
Yeah, proposal B was an alternative parking program that would not have as many kiosks or potentially 0 kiosks, instead give free permits to city residents and property owners, as well as permits that others could purchase that don't live or don't have property within the city limits for a fee. Could be 100, could be 150. And every other visitor, if they don't want to purchase a pass or if they're just tourists coming in, they could pay via app, Park Mobile app. So that was proposal B. Proposal A had the kiosks plus the app. Out of all the comments I heard, I do want to make one point this is a misconception we hear a lot, is that we have all this new construction. We have all these uncapping of properties with the transfers of properties. But when that new construction happens and that property value goes up, that has the effect of reducing the overall millage rate for the city. So if you build a $10 million house, yes, you're gonna be paying $100,000 on taxes or whatever it is, but the city, then other residents are gonna see a reduction in their tax rate overall, so it
And
does
the
not.
city is not going to see an increase.
No, we don't see up to an inflationary rate, and that, I know Ms. Lacy had talked about the inflationary rate, but there's much more to the Headley rollback calculation than just an inflationary rate. Actually, between 2017 and 18, for example, the city lost tax revenue as opposed to getting tax revenue because of the Headley inflationary calculation. So it's not that simple.
And the cost of goods and services is going up at a faster rate than inflation.
And why are our taxes?
And that's
not
Jeff,
going down?
you're not
That's the
here to
case.
speak, that's. Because you have turns to speak.
Ms. Carroll.
I can brief. Carol Winard at 141 Snyder Street in Harbor Springs. I've attended a lot of meetings now and I've heard a lot of different options as to the fact that there must be all these different ways to get revenue. What I would encourage people to do, and I think City Council and Victor maybe and Nick need to do this again, is to have one meeting that only covers Headley with lots of charts. Because I did take the opportunity to sit down with Nick and Victor last week for about an hour and a half, went through how the Headley Amendment works. And to Victor's point, because I used to think when you put the huge new home on Beach Drive, I thought, sweet, the city's getting 200,000 or whatever the taxes would be. That's not how it works. And so I think for people to keep saying, don't touch the Headley, don't go after that Headley rollback again, there's got to be other ways to get it, or you get it because of all the new construction. That is not accurate. So I think that it might be helpful, because I really believe that that's probably our best avenue is the Headley Amendment, is to show people charts that literally your property tax millage rate has gone down as all this new construction comes in. My recollection, I don't have the budget in front of me, but I think the forecast this year for an increase in property taxes for the city is about 50,000 total. So with all the new construction going on, the city's going to get 50,000 more in property taxes this year because of how the Headley Amendment and property work. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you.
No.
Oh, man, now that you mentioned it. No, I just have a very brief comment. I'm Bill Mulder, 372 West Summit Street. And I heard in one of the comments, I think it was Ms. Corr's comment about the non-homestead property owners paying so much more to the city. That's a common misconception that we always want to talk about and get straight, because the non-homestead homeowners don't pay any more to the city. We all pay exactly the same to the city, right? The extra comes to the school system. So we're all in it together at the same rate, non-homestead and homestead. So,
Thanks. The other one. We'll see.
Anna Mulder, 372 West Summit. I think the Headley is a good thing to go after, like everybody thinks. The one thing that I didn't hear you guys talk much about was what we can do to harness all this energy in the township. People that are upset about this paid parking thing. And I feel like they think they're part of our community, and that's where they pick up their mail. It's what their mailing address is. And maybe we're wrong to just say, let's disregard what they're saying. Maybe we should harness that, and then maybe we should look into things like some type of endowment fund, or like a parks authority, for example. I think there is great willingness out there to participate financially. And I think that would be a great thing for you to instruct Victor to do, is see what we can do to talk to the 2 township supervisors, maybe meet with the boards and see what their receptiveness would be to either Parks Authority or like a Harbor Springs amenity fund or something like that. They come to concerts in the city, they go to farmers market, they use the boat service, lots of things. And we are going to be doing surveys through Parks and Rec to see what that percentage is. That I don't think that should preclude us from starting discussions right now.
Good.
Thank you.
Everyone's had a chance. Last chance. Good. All right. It's back to us.
Well, just real quick for everybody here and whoever's listening, if you got any questions regarding the news review article about the funding for the fire department with jail stuff, reach out to me directly. I'll walk you through the scenario with all that. So I haven't read the news review article personally, but between Nick and I, we can explain what's going on there. And we can't fix what happened this year, but going forward, things will get taken care of. So, and rest assured, there's nothing about it that's going to interrupt service to the community or people that we're serving. So that's it's not a huge issue there, other than some funds that I'll have to reallocate down the road. So if anybody else has got any questions regarding that, like.
Well, I think we need to get some kind of direction because we don't want this just to go on and on. There's a part of me that thinks we should possibly put the paid parking on a ballot and let the voters of Harbor Springs decide what they want to do. That's a possibility. We can do that. And I think have to check with ballots and all that, but I think that's a possibility. We've gotten a lot of pushback from that to let the voters decide. So that I think that's one thing we should talk about. And maybe there should be something else on that ballot also. You know, another option of a way to raise revenue. Be it Headley or Millage or, you know, whatever we come up with. But maybe that's, you know, there's obviously a lot of strong feelings on a lot of people's parts about this. And this, I think maybe the voters need to decide, see what happens.
Taxpayers will be happy.
Yes. They can make it their homestead and move here. I mean, if that's really bottom line.
Right.
The voters maybe are the ones that need to decide on this issue.
Right.
I don't disagree.
We'd have to look into how we would phrase that question.
I know.
Part of the reason to decide how to move forward is that if we did decide to put anything on a ballot, it would have to be crafted in time to make a deadline.
Right.
In order to get the ballot in place.
And decide how we could continue to have some flexibility in the parking. You know, we can't guarantee forever that the rate and all that. I mean, that's impossible to ask, but I'm out of my league with crafting language like that. That's a Jim thing and a Victor thing. But maybe that's one way to handle so much of the folks being upset about it. Maybe that's one way to go about it.
We discussed proposal B that we didn't really get an opportunity to discuss in the last meeting.
But
At our March meeting.
yeah, because we tabled it to March 7th.
Yeah. So we could get more specifics. It's just one other way that maybe we can handle making the choice.
Well, do we want to have them work on a new Headley or police millage? Start, at least get us some information on that.
I like Headley because it's not, I feel like some of the other villages are just kicking the decision out on 2 more years. I think eventually we're gonna have to come back to Henley. I just think that's what's gonna happen,
We're in this situation because of that.
because it didn't get dealt with.
The city, in order to be able to plan long-term
Right,
and operate efficiency, needs predictable income.
it does.
Headley is a way to do that.
And we need a couple different revenue streams, and both of those, Headley is a long-term stream as opposed to a 2 or 3 or 5 year. And what Kyle said, I hadn't even thought about that, in all honesty, about if your police department is running on a millage, then how do you get people to come and work for a short, I hadn't even thought about that. So I appreciate that perspective. That isn't something, and it's very warranted.
On that same perspective, I think applies to city employees in general when we talk about suggestions of reduction in benefits. You know, every company that I can think of, I was talking to one of the DPW managers today, you know, and the cable companies are hiring linemen. You know, any of our city employees that are in the DPW or the electric department could go make more money working for them. Is that what we want to motivate? By talking about reduction in pay or reduction in benefits, and then not have the people that we need, and then not being able to recruit? I think we should be careful with that kind of talk.
Well, also, I think when we talk about running some of our operating expenses on a trust or a donation or an endowment, that makes me very nervous because for the same reason. What if some of those folks who want to donate decide they don't like something and they pull their donation, then what, then we're caught. We can't.
Well, those are great ideas for projects.
For specific projects, are great ideas.
That's great, and we should do that.
Not
And
for
we have done
operating
that.
expenses.
Fire department being an example.
Oh, and we have lots of them in this town that have been wonderful, but not for operating expenses. I just don't think that makes sense.
In my mind, the 2 viable options are Headley override, which fixes the long-term problem and how we got here, and paid parking, which is hugely unpopular in some sections and is not hugely unpopular in others. So in my mind, the simple way to deal with this and put it to bed and let the voters have their vote, since council has not been trusted to do that, is to put both items on a ballot and have the voters vote on Headley and on paid parking.
And the other part,
I agree.
I've thought about this a lot, needless to say. People get to vote in private too. They don't have to worry about
That's right.
pushback and
Public image.
all sorts of stuff. You know, they get to speak their own mind in privacy of a voting booth. And I think we get a truer picture overall of what the voters in Harvard really want.
So you do have, I forgot, and I'll get to mention during the public comment, you do have 5 comments there that are for paid parking from residents. So,
Right. You know, I've talked to people, it's not universal. It's more vocal, it's not universal.
And this is one way to handle that.
So direction, I would suggest to draft, to get into the details that we need to draft ballot measures for those 2 items. And to do it with a view towards getting to an election in August. Because if we don't have that information and whoever's on council gets to a budget cycle, it's gonna get ugly.
I did spend an hour and a half with Nick and Victor the other day about how we need to put in an effort. You know, we're asking for money. We have to try and save some money. So I think at a future meeting, we should have some discussions about where we could cut costs, if there's anywhere we can cut costs. You know, because we need to do our part.
And maybe get some help with what Bob was talking about and some other
Right.
folks I've heard, putting
Absolutely.
some folks together that could help us look at that.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you know, that's where this, you know, the fire authority, if we could take that to the townships. You know, that would say, that came out of our discussion the other day.
Yeah.
You know, and it takes 75 grand right out of the budget, and it gives the fire department more money.
Yeah.
They can get John a secretary.
Looking at township contributions, I mean, it's great ideas here, but none of them are immediate.
Right.
Mayor, are you suggesting different ways to save money that are different than the cuts we proposed in December, or?
Yeah, well, like, You know, if we work with the townships to get the fire authority, we had some other ideas at the meetings. But I think we need, as a council, to also do our part, or the city and the council to do our part to show that we're trying to save money, because there has been a fair amount of that. We need to cut the fat, not that there's a lot of fat to cut.
Explain to me, please, what you mean by going to the townships to discuss the fire authority. We've already got a fire authority.
Well, we've got the fire authority that's funded, they.
By contract.
Yeah.
With the townships.
With the townships, but if the township, or if the authority agrees to
Propose a millage.
To
cover those costs.
then the authority wouldn't be billing the city, they would have their own millage.
Their own operating.
Their own operating millage.
So essentially, the taxpayer will still be paying for the service, except it wouldn't be coming from our general fund. It would free up that from our general fund.
And if these other ideas bring more revenue into the city, then with the subsequent budget cycle, the village could be reduced. Because you wouldn't need as much millage. Would be a great situation to have.
Right.
You wouldn't need as much millage to cover the expenses for that year's budget.
That's for a future meeting, but I think it's definitely something we need to discuss.
Like you said earlier, you could take several different problems to make
Right.
this work. One thing is to put us out. And certainly cutting or saving is part of it.
Yes. All right. We beating this one to death.
Do you have what you need?
I have craft language for Headley and for a paid parking. And I'll look with Jim, we'll talk with Jim Raymer here about whether it's, how we're gonna phrase that, it's an ordinance advisory. There's specific language that, municipalities can use for those kinds of questions, so. I think this issue came up at the Deer Park, it was before my time, but when we put the Deer Park to a vote, there's a specific way you have to phrase it.
Sure there is.
So, yep, those two. And then we'll, future meeting to talk about ways to save, reduce costs.
Well, that's an ongoing annual budget discussion.
All the time.
Something we should have been doing a long time ago. There.
All right. City manager's report.
No
Well, Karen already, you already,
Can't answer the question. Can't answer any questions, okay.
it's up to you. I mean, we just have the rules, but trying to apply them evenly.
Right.
Shoot an email.
Yeah, send me an email.
Text.
We approach you at the bench.
Sorry.
The city received 5 bids to perform testing of our spare transformer. We selected the low bidder, which was about $5,300. The webpage for the city's clean energy efficiency program is up and running. Franklin Energy is our city's new clean energy provider. School board did approve the school resources officer contract. So we hopefully will have someone start relatively soon there, I think by April 1st. And also there's some data here on our EV charging station usage over the past year. As you can see, July, August, September
That's
are
really interesting information.
our heavy months. I have been approached by several people asking for a faster charger down there. I reached out to the vendor and he said, we can't, a charger that you see along the highway, like you go to Meyer and you stop, charge a car for 30 minutes, those things cost $150,000 to put in. So, while our vendor did put in this charger, they don't have the money to put in a $150,000 charger. They are going to increase the speed, they're going to double the charge this summer, so. We did start doing email notices for boards and commissions, so people can sign up to get agendas and meeting notices emailed to them. We have 55 people who have signed up for that already, and we've put it in the Harbor Light, we've put it on social media and on the website to let people know they can sign up. So it'll be a continual thing. Please spread the word.
Works really well.
Some boards and commissions meeting, Yep, ZBA approved updates to the bylaws, you saw that. The DDA discussed Ice Fest, a downtown lighting project, and Merchants Walkway. Parks Board discussed their bylaws and started reviewing the draft parks plan. Planning Commission reviewed a preliminary site plan and recapped and discussed short-term rentals, and then the tree board finalized, they got together sort of a final plan for Arbor Day Fest. There's still details to work out, and then review the implementation matrix. I did have a couple MPPA meetings this month, one in Lansing and one on risk assessment. We had a public meeting. We had about 7-8 people attend for the East Third Water Sewer Project. That's going to probably start in mid-April, weather dependent, and should be about 6 weeks. We're talking about closing between Nelson and Ingalls, so it's not a large stretch of East Third, it's a small stretch. And CCE 911 meeting, Petoskey was pretty quick. So next item on the agenda is boards and commissions, and we have 2 open seats. One is on the Tree Advisory Board, and one is on the Planning Commission. The Tree Advisory Board, Sue Stewart, who was the chair, had resigned in December, and that position has been open, and we have 2 people for that position, John Cassidy and Tressa Johnson. For the Planning Commission, Andy Bowman, the chair, resigned. He just was not able to make the meetings this year. He had 5 or 6 he couldn't come to, so he decided he did his time. So we have 6 applicants for that one position, and this position does not have to be an elector of the city. We're allowed 2 planning commission members who do not have to be electors. Andy Bowman was not an elector, so the city could choose to fill it with an elector or a non-elector. We have 6 people who applied. Fred Simons, a few of them, Fred Simons, Rachel Morford, and David LaMarche had applied for it back in last year when we replaced the members then. So Fred Simons, he's here. He served on the ZBA previously. Mark Rondell, Rachel Morford, Barry Lustgarten, David LaMarche, who is on the Harbor Springs Sewer Authority right now. We appointed him in December. And then John Cassidy, who also applied to serve on the tree board. For the tree board, council appoints and approves. For the planning commission, it's a mayor appointment, but the council has to approve. So I'll leave that up to you guys. Let's start with the tree board.
Yeah, can start with the tree board. Cassidy or Johnson.
I don't know either one.
Their applications were.
Yeah, but if anybody here knows them, that's one more.
I know John not well, but lives right at the end of the street.
Oh, okay.
He was at Arbor Day, helping at Arbor Day last year.
Yeah, he was at Arbor Day. It's a good guy.
Sounds good to me.
Thinks we'd like to get him, he'd like to get involved. You know, they have said that
He's young,
before.
got kids.
No kids, but younger. Yeah. Just some.
Well, and it sounds like he's already active.
Just got
Grew up in Pellston. Yeah.
all right.
That's
Sounds
all I
like
know
John
about John.
Cassidy's
He's a
our
good guy.
tree man.
Good to me.
Good with
Nick,
that?
are you gonna do it?
Yes.
I don't think so.
I don't think for the tree board, I think obviously for the planning commission, but by consensus, the tree board.
Because we wanted to get started doing stuff.
All right, planning commission.
All right.
Safe to say you eliminated John Cassidy.
Yeah. So I'd like to nominate Barry Lustgarten.
I'll second that.
Discussion?
I just need to let you know he's actually married to my niece. Most people don't know that. Not that it's here nor there really, but just
Well, that
be
might
fully,
disqualify.
I know, just to be fully.
Totally
I'm totally transparent. I can weigh in if you
Little late on
want.
that full disclosure.
I can weigh in if you want.
Tips right there. All right, well, I got it.
Yeah.
First
Fine
and
with me.
second, any other discussion? No argument. Okay. Roll call, please.
John Leo,
Yes.
John Cups,
Yes.
Al Dika,
Yes.
Nancy Rondell,
Yes,
and Matt Bogira.
Yes.
Motion carried.
They're all good
that'll be great.
choices.
Yeah, what a treat to have choices.
That's
I
right.
mean, just a
Absolutely.
whole different thing than a year or two. It's great. It's great.
Okay. New or old business?
I have one quick new business that I'd like to request to go on the agenda maybe for the next meeting, if it's that time. I would like us to explore what the term resident means in the bylaws of our committees and our commissions and our boards. I think there's confusion over what resident means here, because we have different definitions. So I'd love to see us work on some kind of consistent definition, at least for our boards and our commissions. Because when I ask people what it means, I get a whole bunch of different answers every time. So I think I'd like to know. If that's,
Maybe it should be
I think we need
elector or
yeah, there's a lot of,
More
yeah,
clear.
something more
Something.
specific.
get something specific.
Nancy knows I've explored this a little bit. I know Jim and I have talked previously about this. It's convoluted. Elector limits more people,
Right.
but resident can be more broad. There's a state definition of where you've resided and intend to go back to, and maybe you've been there domiciled, and some states have it as 183 days, 184 days. So there's different definition. I agree that there is a section in our boards and commissions ordinance. It's just a general boards and commission ordinance where a definition of resident could fit in.
Yeah, makes sense.
Figure out.
Okay,
Thanks.
anything else? No. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Well,